Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's such a pleasure to welcome you today for this very special Insight series of Areni Global. It's so nice to see your name pop in my screen. Welcome to everyone that I know. It's a pleasure to see you again. And for the first timers, if it's your first time with Areni today, welcome. It's a pleasure to host you. I'm Pauline Vicat. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Executive Director of Areni Global. And let me just take a minute to tell you why we are here today. So if you don't know us already, Areni Global is a think tank dedicated to the future of fine wine. And Areni Live is our annual gathering that we organize once a year in a different part of the globe, in a different region, wine region of the world. And we gather top minds, both sitting within the wine world, but also outside of the wine world, to collectively think about the future of fine wine. And last week, we were in Sonoma and Napa in California to talk about really fascinating topics and what we think are urgent conversation to have for the future of fine wine. So our role at Areni is to look at how the world is changing and how these changes impact both the production and the distribution of fine wine. And our objective at the think tank, when we create it and when we put the program together, is to build a balanced program exploring both production and distribution, and to curate a diverse group of experts. Again, as I said before, both from the world of wine, but also outside of the world of wine, to allow the emergence of new ideas and actionable insights. Usually who attends those editions, and the California edition in particular was attended by 60 thought leaders from 12 different countries. We had journalists and writers, winemakers, distributors, sommeliers, but also politicians, international tech specialists, finance experts. We had some people from the scientific community as well. It was a very rich and very diverse crowd. It was actually amazing, but I'm a bit biased. And amongst the 2023 attendees and also partners were Felicity Carter, the editor-at-large at Areni Global. Hi, Felicity. Anna Comfort, the Vice President of International Marketing for the Wine Institute of California. Yurisa Cruz, the CEO and President of the Sonoma Wine Growers Association, and Nicole Rollet, the one and only Principal of Chêne Bleu Winery, and also the Chair of Areni Global. So all of you played a critical role in the execution of this edition, and I just wanted to start the session today by thanking you for being with us today and also for your engagement with the project. But before diving deep into some of the conclusions and some insight, Nicole, I just wanted to start asking you, you came up with the idea of a wine think tank back in 2017. You are the original, thinker about this. What were your initial motivations? I mean, why did we need a wine think tank?
It was the 10th anniversary of our selling our own wine, and we were trying to figure out what was the best way to do that. We thought it's considered a bit like a thinking person's wine. So rather than some big party, it made sense to us to bring together some of the top thinkers to figure out what the next goal should be for 10 years from now. And we figured that, having my background in think tanks, the best way to do that was to create this gathering, which was surprisingly missing in the wine world. Doesn't really have a think tank, and that's what started it. And I had the great pleasure of collaborating with you on that. And I was so thrilled when you ran with it afterwards and made it into the incredible organization that it is today.
Well, and hopefully, it's been successful. And actually, Hannah, Carissa, you both came to previous editions, both, as individual, but also with your corporate hats, because the Wine Institute of California and the Sonoma Wine Growers Association have been, long-term partners at Areni. So what were your main objectives coming to the California edition last week? Maybe both as, an entity and as an individual. And, we are going to talk about the California edition quite at length after. What made it, special for you, the key factors of success. Anna, if you want to start.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, thank you, Pauline. Thank you for having me here this morning. Hello, everybody. Lovely to see many of your names pop up in the chat. And Nicole, thank you so much for leading this. I thought it was really such an important opportunity to host the think tank here in California, having been a previous participant, but also such a supporter of this concept of global partnership, as together we look at major issues and opportunities that our collective industry and community faces when we look ahead. And I wanted to ensure that California and California's vintners and growers are part of this conversation, not only today, but well into the future. And so integrating many of our leaders and some of the voices of our community, ensuring that there's a perspective that was included was really critical. So with Wine Institute, we of course are always focused on ensuring a viable and successful future for our wine industry here in California. And then with what I do in terms of sharing not only the story of California wine, but really the wines themselves and the leadership of what's happening here in California with the rest of the world. This was the perfect opportunity. And so welcoming such a remarkable group of thought leaders in the wine industry here, and then also ensuring that they had an opportunity to experience and understand a little bit of what's happening here from different perspectives was really a valuable opportunity that I know everyone will benefit from, both here and around the world.
Rissa?
Well, Honor set that up so nicely, so thank you. And good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are joining us from. It's really exciting to be here and kind of have this concluding conversation representing last week. And so what was really important to me, I think so valuable, is at least in my experience, I had the opportunity to participate both in Champagne and Bordeaux. And I just think of these very old world wine regions, so robust with just history and learning and opportunity. And then to come to California, I think much like the experience in South Africa, where we're in the new world of wine and have the opportunity to think about, and so close to Silicon Valley in the sense of innovation and technology and this overlay of like, what does the future hold? So to me, it was this perfect intersection and the right time to really bridge sort of our thinking of taking the best of what we've all learned and sort of have been through and that experience, boots on the ground experience, and then overlaying it with what we're doing here and seeing how we better collaborate. So I think there's much to learn from all different regions around the world and different perspectives. And it was just wonderful to have everyone in our backyard for once, and just to be able to highlight our wines and our vineyards and all of our thought leaders too. So thrilled to be here, and so many great conversations ahead because they're very, very meaningful topics that were covered by so many wonderful people. So thank you.
And Felicity, I mean, I've got the privilege to work with you on a daily basis at Areni, and we have what I found fascinating conversation together almost all the time, and that's the privilege of working with you because it's always fascinating. And you've been with us you've been at almost every edition of the think tank since 2017. What made this one special? I mean, if you had to remember one thing in particular from this edition.
Well, I think, well, first of all, the beauty and hospitality of California was really extraordinary. I think what's happened is we've got a lot tighter about the way we do this, and we've got our intellectual approach down. And what really surprised me in talking to people who are very high level people is how much there's a yearning in the wine industry to talk about some of these things. People said to me over and over and over, it's wonderful that we can sit down and talk about these things, because in the day-to-day, world of having to get the wine made and having to do the marketing and so on, to actually step back and think about the bigger picture is a real opportunity for people.
And kudos to Nicole for sensing this, because I've got the same feedback. And that's also why we continue it every year, because we feel there's a real need to actually take that time. So we ask quite a lot of time from people, because the delegation and the contributors stay with us for 3 days, but actually taking that time off and concentrating on those topics for 3 days, I think is always one of the key factors of success. But let me share my screen and show you or talk to you about what Areni Global 2023 was. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Yeah. So first of all, 2023, what it was firstly about, amazing partners and sponsors, because the story goes that the event was supposed to happen in 2020 in California. We've been planning it for 3 years, and 3 years of international disruption later, we came to California a bit later than we had expected. So thank you very much to the Wine Institute of California, to the Sonoma County Wine Growers, to the Napa Valley Vintners, to Fire Forest for supporting us and being with us for those 3 years, and allowing us to put that program together. And a special thanks to O'Donnell Lane, that was the event agency that we work with, because being based in London, we needed boots on the ground, and they were just fantastic. And they allowed that everything worked perfectly, and we know how much that's important. So that's the group, and the future of fine wine will be diverse, and diversity, of course, means many, many things. But we always choose to organize the think tank at wineries that somehow reflect some of the economic fabric of the region. So it's very different from a year to another. And so this year we had, 1.5 days in Sonoma and 1 day in Napa. And we were very lucky to be hosted by Jackson Family Wines, Dutton Ranch, Buena Vista Winery, and Promontory. So big thank you to Katie Jackson, Steve and Joe Dutton, Jean-Charles Boisset and Claire Tully at Buena Vista Winery, and the whole of the Harlan family that were incredible hosts. So some of the program highlights, again, it's 2.5 days of high-level thinking, and we build the program so that we can explore the future of fine wine through different formats. We always have 4 different formats through which we explore the future of fine wine during every think tank. The first format that we have are panel conversations. So you all know that format of a classic panel. We had 2 this year. We had one on game-changing agriculture and the type of practices that we can put in place and increment and scale up in order to adapt to climate change, mitigate climate change, but also be very proactive in limiting the impact of climate change. So that was a fascinating conversation on the first day. And we also had a key conversation on fine wine and artificial intelligence, and what it meant for us as humans, but also as a sector, as an industry, with Steve Bratt, which is no other than the World Economic Forum, not the Wine Economic Forum, the World Economic Forum experts on artificial intelligence. And I'm just telling you this not to make you jealous, but actually because all of those conversations are going to be analyzed and recapped by Areni through the summer. So if you don't receive our newsletter yet, if you don't follow us on social media and you are interested in those topics, please do. It's totally free and it's open to everyone, because we are going to share all of this during the summer. Of course, it will take more than an hour to recap all those fascinating insights, but that's my job and Felicity's job over the next 2 months. We always have a debate because it's great fun, and we have 2 of the debaters extraordinaire today with Anna and Felicity that debated around the topic of, is the age of wine democratization over? It's serious arguments, made in a non that serious way, and it's always great fun, and there's always some key insight that goes from the debate. We always have wine tasting, of course, because the future of fine wine can't be imagined without wine tasting. This year we had one around the Green Awards in Napa and California, throughout California. So wineries that are exemplary in their viticultural practice. That was very, very interesting. And we always have the defined fine wine, wine tasting when everybody brings a bottle of fine wine, and we discuss that notion through the evening. For the first time this year, we also had winery visits, so 4 in Sonoma, 4 on the Napa side. And those were not, ordinary Napa visit, but very curated ones where each of them had a topic that we went deep, that we covered in depth. So, from old genetic materials and old vines, to the difference between wine and place and wine of styles, to the relevance of making a 200-year plan. So of course, all of those iconic wineries, thanks to them for the welcome, but we are going to release some of the key points of each of the visit during the summer as well. And the last thing that we do at the think tank, which is really the heart of everything that we do and the reason why we gather for 3 days, are the roundtables. So how they work is that they gather a group of 8 to 10 experts. Again, very diverse group, always someone that's not from the wine industry, someone from production, someone from distribution, local people from California, international people, so that we've got, as much diversity of opinion and diversity of angles as well. They are spread out through the 2 days, and we explore in depth, 6 topics. And this year, those are the topics that we explored on the future of vines itself, so the material itself and what we need to do in order to secure that, the future of consumer segmentation, the future of wine tourism. We had this theme on authenticity, typicity, identity, and what it means for fine wine. We talked about how to secure long-term reputation and how it's going to change in the near future, and the role and place of wine education in the future of fine wine. So each of us in the panel today have attended a different roundtable. So in turn, I'm going to ask my fellow panelists to present their roundtables, to present some of the key takeaways, some of them because, of course, it's always hard to summarize 2 days of work in a 5-minute presentation, and some of the next steps as well, and actions that were decided within the groups. A bit of housekeeping. So please use the Q&A box if you want to address any direct questions to one of the panelists and presenter. I'll try to address them at the end of everyone's presentation if they directly, relate to the conversation. Otherwise, we'll move them to the end of the presentation at the end of the hour. The roundtables happen under the Chatham House rules of non-attribution, meaning that we can report anonymously what was said, but we can't tell you who said that. That's also why it's going to be anonymous today. And use the chat. Please do use the chat for your comments, your feedback, and also if you know about any article research initiatives that are in relation or that could be relevant with some of the topics that we are going to discuss now, because we can add them to the post-event recap, and we can start working on them and etc. and etc. So without further ado, Carissa, over to you for the securing the future of vines.
Excellent. Well, I think it only makes sense to start the conversation in the vineyard where most of the practices start, which get us into sort of the real dialogue around fine wine. And so, as you mentioned, 2 days of conversation summarized in 1 slide and 5 key takeaways is hardly, it's not enough and a little unfair, but to my team out there who were fantastic and what a great conversation, I'm doing my best to give our conversation justice. So what I thought was very interesting about securing the future of vines is in the beginning, there were so many different directions we could go in. Were we literally talking about the healthy soils and the plant and sort of research and technology? Or were we talking about how we educate consumers and what does it actually mean in the marketplace? So we kind of took a twofold approach really to think about it. And the one was really, for lack of a better term, called it kind of the supply side. So how do we ensure that we literally have a physical plant, a vine, a vineyard in the future? And what do we need to get there? And then on the other side, how do we ensure that the marketplace is either leading or following along with what we're doing in our vineyards? And how do we connect all of those dots, which I think as we were in discussion, so much of what we ended up talking about in the marketplace trickled down into all of those other roundtable discussions, which probably was well planned, Pauline. So congratulations on that thinking. But our main takeaways was starting in this the supply side on the physical plant, a lot of conversation around just sustainability, regenerative agriculture, definitely coming off of our conversation and panel that evening before. But really recognizing the need for additional research and investment in our vineyards, literally learning about, again, the impact of healthy soils and what we can do. And especially, and this was a really eye-opening moment, was a conversation we had around the fact that there hasn't really been any improvement, research, or change in our access to different rootstocks in over 100 years. So we're literally, if you think about the evolution of technology, here we are in a Zoom with folks from around the world, and yet the very foundation of our vineyards is 100+ years old in terms of advancement and learning. And that was just this kind of aha moment for all of us that really then led to more and more debate and conversation. But thinking about that importance for resiliency and diversity, whether it's from, crop health, crop management, crop protection, moving forward, just how much more we need to do collectively, and what a great place to work together on sort of vine health and that research. And then, of course, I mean, a number of regions around the world are either dealing with droughts or flooding, the two extremes of our water situation. So just the recognition of really thinking through water and how that remains just such a critical priority for all of us in our vineyards. And then depending on where you are in the world, kind of this conversation around labor, costs, regulations, compliance, what's happening in the EU around ingredient and labeling, the World Health Order around, the idea of alcohol, its place in a healthy diet, thinking about how we really need to think about that and use technology and advancements to sort of move us along in that direction. And that kind of brings us to that next point around just consumer education engagement, especially around, again, those conversations of sustainability and regenerative ag can be very confusing out in the marketplace. So how do we sort of level set and make sure we're continuing to educate in a way that's meaningful and not confusing together for consumers? And then all of this sharing, which is such a perfect forum, but really relying back on you. So sorry, Pauline, Felicity, to add more work to your plate. But we thought Areni was such a fantastic forum of this best practices, case study, learning, sharing. So as we learn, whether it's about rootstock, water storage, recharge, efficiency, consumer education, let's get there together. So, and then just a final thought, not to be, doom and gloom, but I think it was just an interesting picture around how much we all appreciate the value of vineyards and agriculture in our communities, whether it's open space, whether it's the opportunity to recharge our aquifers, whether it's carbon sequestration, all of those things. So if viticulture fails, if we don't get this right, if we don't support the future of wines and vines, then what really happens to agriculture, what happens to this wine community we all know and love? So I'll end with that thought and pass it off to our other roundtable discussions.
Thanks, Carissa. It's interesting. One of my personal takeaway. It's always fascinating to see that we have 6 very different roundtables that cover very different aspects of the fine wine world, and every time there are those big common threads. Like, of course, education, and what we include in education is something that we've discussed in our group, and everything's related to the new cost of farming is something that we've discussed in our group as well. And alcohol, I'm sure, was present in many conversations as well. So again, if you know any research, I mean, Carissa was talking about rootstock. If you know about interesting projects, we'll be sharing also the research that we've explored with Jackson Family Wine on carbon sequestration and regenerative agriculture. I know that Carissa and the Sonoma Wine Growers Association is doing loads of different things as well in California, Wine of California as well. So we'll be sharing this in the post-event recap as well. There will be that shared resources. So if you want to add anything that you think is important for us to consider, please do add that in the chat. I forgot to mention that my colleague Sarah is active in the chat as well, so she can answer all of the loads of questions as well. All right, Anna, over to you on the segmentation of the consumer. So we're going, we're jumping.
No problem.
From production
Yes.
to segmentation and consumer.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Pauline. Well, we had a very vibrant group, and we were led by, of course, by the talented and insightful Polly Hammond from Five Forests, and she did an excellent job of convening us. And let's go right into it on the next slide. And what we were discussing, of course, was the future of customer segmentation. And we quickly realized that we couldn't even talk about segmentation without really talking about who the future customer would be for not just fine wine, but really we sort of expanded into the whole realm of wine. And really we zeroed in on why this was so critical, and what's at stake was ensuring the relevance and resiliency of wine going forward, and particularly in this very dynamic and changing environment. And we zeroed in on identified sort of 2 key elements. So first was what's driving this need is the remarkable increased access to wine that we have around the world, and this rapidly changing and dynamic environment of sales channels. So we are reaching more and different people in different ways, but we're also collecting all of this new data in so many ways that we work. And of course, now that technology is playing such a critical role in how we engage with people. The other key insight is that rapid change is speeding up it's not ending. And both in terms of our environment, and we all understand that, but also in terms of the expectations that we're seeing on the part of our customers and future customers, and how they want to engage with what we do with wine, whether it's in person, whether it's through the glass, it's through their experience either at home or at restaurants or even at retail. So based on that, let's go to the next slide, Pauline.
So do you just mean when you say it's not ending, so do you just mean that it's more and more, so we don't stop?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it just
We're not
adds on to everybody's plate. Right.
Exactly. And that it's not just that change isn't ending, it's that it is accelerating.
Yeah.
And we're going to continue to see this, and these factors will continue to evolve and impact our current customer base as well as our future customer base. So then in regards to that, so what do we need to do in order to better understand and identify where we go next? And so we zeroed in on sort of key conversations, things that we need to discuss collectively, but then also challenges that we need to understand and address. And the first is, of course, starting with data. And we all recognize, we had a long conversation about the fact that none of us have enough data, or that it is accessible, but also that data is only as good as the understanding that comes along with it, what we do with it. And so understanding the scope of data that are we actually able to look at and understand our markets, our customers, who they are, where they're coming from, and do that with clarity. And that key insight is really critical. Part of that then, of course, comes to sharing best practices as well as information. And so it's interesting that this came up in Carissa's roundtable, of course, and it's really central to what we were doing at Areni, and so it's very top of mind. And one of the key elements is, so if we can identify solutions in collecting and using data, then how do we scale that? And as we better understand who our customers are and can be, how do we make that work within our industry? And then identifying the realistic levers that we can use to attract and engage with those consumers. So in terms of challenges within all of this, of course, getting the foundations right from the get-go, and that we are understanding our customers and the marketplace effectively. And that, of course, ties right back to the very first point in terms of data. The challenge in terms of lack of resources, and how are we able to collect and access and then use the information that we have. And I thought this was a really brilliant insight that came up, is adopting a willingness to fail, which is something that we don't often see within our wine industry. And that's critical for being able to pursue and push forward ideas, new innovations, and understanding. I thought that was a great point. So let's keep going.
Well, and on that note of willingness to fail as well, we talked about this in our roundtable, but also the culture of sharing, I suppose, the failure, not just, do it on your own, but also explain why. And we have that conversation many times in the different cultures as well, and how different cultures are accepted failure and mistakes. And really, you had an international roundtable, and everyone was, advising for this, that share of.
Absolutely. And there was a really good and robust conversation within some of that, which also included, under this sort of broader concept of a willingness to fail, a willingness to leave behind some of the metrics that we always use, or change the way we think about them, such as, how do we think about our ROI? What defines that? Is there a different way to look at it, or is there a different timeline that we need to use? And I thought that was a really interesting and robust area of our conversation.
Was that something that everybody, like when you talked about how we look at our return on investment and what makes it, and the metrics, did you have some kind of agreement of what needed to be left behind, or is it going to be a case by case for companies, and depending on who you are?
Absolutely. And that's where that brought us back to this whole concept of scale, and recognizing the difference in scale in our businesses, the different pressures that we have, whether a business is family owned, or has private investment, or even is public, and that all of those factors change that. But being able to embrace a willingness to fail, or a willingness to push the definitions, to challenge
the way you think. So a change of mindset that would be welcome for everyone, but of course how this changed and how people are going to fine tune, that is going to be depending on who they are.
And that within this dynamic environment, and as we're seeing our environments change and the speed of that change increase, that ability to challenge will become increasingly important for us to remain nimble and adaptive in our businesses. And again, bringing this all back to the customers. Okay,
and resilient,
exactly.
So what lies ahead?
Yes, and what lies ahead? So things that we know that are going to be affecting our future customers in this dynamic, and of course, unpredicated cataclysmic. Oh, sorry, I noticed there's a typo in there. I apologize. Cataclysmic shifts. So of course, climate. Right, that's at the top of everybody's list, but also COVID, and I put COVID in quotes there because it was basically things like COVID that we did not even see around the corner that had such dramatic and lasting impact on our industry and of course business around the world. Another one of these that we do see right ahead of us and that we're currently in but is just going to continue to increase is what we named the choice glut. Too much choice. Of course, our consumers and our future customers have so many options within the entire beverage alcohol space that did not exist previously, but also within the wine space itself, in terms of the evolution and development of brands, options, packaging, flavors, winemaking styles, approaches. All of this is creating so much choice, which is good, but also very challenging for our customers. And how do they decide? And of course, contraction and consolidation. These are things that we've been seeing and dealing with, but it's only going to continue as we all know, we're facing the largest transfer of wealth in the history of population, and that will have some very direct impacts on our industry, of course, and also this massive generational shift. And then very interesting piece, which is the frayed infrastructure. And there's a very interesting point that came up in our discussion around this notion of de-urbanization and how that is directly impacting the wine industry. So people moving out of our cities. San Francisco is a good example, since it was very close to us as we're having this conversation, and as people have left San Francisco, and that San Francisco is becoming a little bit less of a draw right now from a tourism perspective, that's having a direct impact on the wine industry with Sonoma and Napa, and of course our other wine regions nearby, where San Francisco is traditionally a hub. It's a magnet that draws people there, and from there then they go to the wine country. So how do we deal with this as we see de-urbanization happening? And then of course our global supply chain and our cold chain, which as a result of COVID has been revealed, all of the challenges within that are systemic and will require a complete overhaul. So these are some of the big factors that have a direct impact on our customers, consumers, as well as trade, and how we engage with them and who they are.
Yeah, how we're going to, engage with the consumers when they are spread out in not the town center, but like what's the supply chain that we need to build. On that topic, actually, we made a podcast with a gentleman who's responsible for the urbanization of London on the future of cities. I think 2 years ago, Sarah, if you can find the reference, if that's of interest, and actually trying to imagine what the cities are going to look like post-COVID and the major changes and what it actually means for our supply chain, because it's a fascinating conversation. Thank you very much, Anna. Again, if you've got questions or feedback or remark, just shout in the chat or on the Q&A.
And I think I have one last slide, which was just the actions.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. Of course,
I'm so sorry. So I'll be very
action
brief.
Are so important. That's the center.
Yeah, because especially with this conversation, because we were dealing with so many big issues that it was critical that we zero in on some things that we could take collectively as our global wine industry, but also as individuals. And I thought this was so great. Right at the very top was hiring people who can speak in their own voices to the customers and consumers that we want to have. And we thought that was really essential. And really at the heart of that is ensuring that we are connecting with our future customers based on their values and our shared values and how we do that. And I think that that's really essential when we start thinking about climate and climate change and sustainability and social sustainability and dealing with all of these rapidly changing factors and how they're impacting our customers. And this, I just want to draw a big red circle around as being really critical. But then also this point that we keep coming back to, which is collective knowledge, and that's vital to our future. And that's something that we talk about quite a bit in how we do this on a global basis. And of course, embracing data, that brings us back to this whole where we started in terms of customer segmentation, and prioritizing resourcing to ensure that we can share data and share knowledge. I love this whole notion about other things that we can do, which is creating a format and a forum for business modeling. And this was an area where we saw Areni being able to help us lead. And within that, one of the key things is embracing this notion of a long-term vision. And many of us had the opportunity, or a few of us, excuse me, had the opportunity to be a part of a conversation that was led
the relevance
by
of building it, a 200-year
Karen
plan.
McNeil on this 200-year plan, which is just such a great concept. And for me, it was very inspiring as we think about California's role within our global wine future. But of course, also within business modeling, the importance of education and experience, and then also sharing information. Again, coming back to this, not only tools and resources and things that we have that we've built that we can easily share with others, but also how can we share real information such as like around our financials and our financial plans so that we truly are ensuring the business viability of our wine industry as we go forward. Because of course, this all comes back to the fact that we can't protect our vineyards, our wines, or even our people unless our businesses are able to sustain a viable future going forward.
And make some money. Yep. Thanks, Anna.
Excellent,
Nicole,
thank you.
Nicole, you were on the roundtable on the future of wine tourism, and you also had some fantastic conversation. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, we were lucky that several people in our group were leading the pack in terms of some of their initiatives at the wineries, but also in terms of the tour guides and education. So they had some very good concrete examples of just what we could be doing. So we, of course, wanted to look at what the benchmarks were doing around the world and some of the statistics that were very encouraging. But if I want to jump into the takeaways, I think we should probably share some exciting things that came up, because one of the big things you deal with is that some of these tasting room experiences, the most exciting and creative ones, they're actually awareness drivers, but not revenue drivers. So that's a big problem, because yes, they might bring in money, you might be able to charge for them, but the costs associated can be very significant. And so you have to make sure that you're following through with sales and with future sales. And that's one of the exciting but difficult challenges that we identified. So there's clearly huge room for increased creativity and unusual experiences. There's infinite appetite by clients for that, and they talk about it, and they Instagram about it, and chocolate and wine tasting, et cetera, et cetera. Although we have to recognize that at the end of the day, most of our revenues will come from the meat and potato stuff. But reputationally, wine tourism can add such an important layer to our sales. So the non-wine and still related experiences, for example, tapping into your history or the history of your region, that can be fantastic. There were great examples of things we could do with that if anyone's interested. Also, the fact that you diversify away from only wine experiences means that you can get different demographics, you can get kids, you can get also a greater diversity in terms of people who walk through your door. And you can convert people who come because of wine with someone else, and then they leave very excited. So that's a statistic showing that the majority of people attending wine tourism and choosing destinations are actually getting their recommendations from friends and family. You can work with the local communities, which is huge, because the wine tourism has such an important role in securing the reputation and an economy of your region, which might not attract other kinds of tourists initially. The issue that you talked about for personalized data and personalized experiences, very true, even more true in the wine tourism sector, and the whole data question is essential. So we need to capture more data at the arrival point of the clients to understand where they're from, and you need people who are trained up properly, or you can hire actors and professional communicators because they're so good at interacting with people, but also you engage differently with the follow-up, and you can continue the experience. Right now, a lot of time is wasted where we don't capture enough for the follow-through sales. Also, people are really asking for hands-on experiences in the vineyard, as some people offer the blending seminars, but even things like helping with waxing bottles on magnums and things like that is exciting. Finally, the awareness that people are developing of tourism's role way beyond what you would expect. For example, in many regions, they've discovered that one tourist visiting a region can create 11 jobs. And I don't think that wineries are understanding fully the power that they have in their local tourism boards and communities to weigh in on their economic development role. In the schools, making sure that you bring children to see vineyard work, even if, of course, they can't taste the wines. Underrepresented groups who don't normally get to visit the vineyards, especially with fancy or expensive wines, doing outreach programs, super important to secure your legitimacy and place in your community. And very, very fun to see how going forward the use of technology is going to help bring the wine tourism experiences to people instead of waiting for people to come to you. Of course, there's the metaverse that everyone's talking about, but also ambassador programs like Jean-Charles Boissier's initiative to have these kind of Tupperware parties where friends show their wines to each other. Finally, the challenge of wanting international clients, but then needing to find a way to capture future sales when they go back to their homes. When we had some good ideas about how to do that. So
can you share maybe some good practice on that point? Or you mentioned Jean-Charles' program on, I'm asking particularly on bringing the wine tourism experience to people when they can't travel to us, because I know that's a big concern for most regions. Any other examples than
for example, people can take a plain room in someone's house or anywhere, or in their tasting room somewhere, and they can use those projectors, which are now much more affordable, to project on the walls and create their terroir all around and sort of transport people to that. That was only available to mayor, how do you say, mairie, town halls and places like that, city halls, or wine museums or whoever. Now that has been scaled down, and you can take your show on the road.
So it's like a home cinema, but like tonight we're in South Africa.
Yeah, you used to have to go to Epcot cool. Center to experience, big budget recreation of a certain environment. now you have a lot of DIY popping up, which is exciting. And in terms of getting those international sales, if you're a big winery, you can set up, as some of the people in our group have, actual retailers online in the countries with fulfillment, but others can make arrangements with existing retailers and do some kind of profit sharing in exchange for making sure that those people carry their full range. So some very creative ways of solving for that problem, to capture the future sales. When you own the data, everything is possible.
Yeah, don't forget to ask for data and to actually own it. Yeah. Before handing it over to Felicity, I know that you had one exciting next step that you wanted to share also that came up out of your roundtable.
Yes, I guess the encouraging is statistics that the entire wine world has gone up about the wine tourism world 3 times already, expecting it to grow in the next 10 years. So that's fantastic. And Sula has its tasting room in India, which is 350,000 visitors a year now. They just opened. So let's not forget the developing world. And so all of this made us think, okay, how do we, realizing the huge potential power of this and the importance of securing the sustainability of our vineyards, of our landscapes, we decided that the best way to really jumpstart that would be to create a movie, a feature film. There was also a talk about a documentary series, but anybody who wants to know more about that project and participate in some way, who has connections in Hollywood, etc., we have a first plan for producers and a lot of the things that we would need to do that. So anyone who wants to brainstorm on that project with us and collaborate is welcome to contact me.
Amazing.
And that's
Thanks,
what Areni
Nicole.
is going to promote. that little
more job for us.
So.
We love that. I'm gonna stop sharing now, because Felicity doesn't have slides. She has a story to tell us about authenticity, typicity, and identity. And
that's right. So because of the nature of my topic, I've chosen to do it the authentic, historic way with no PowerPoint. So this was one of the most interesting discussions that I've had in the wine world. And at times over the 2 days, it became very contentious as well. On the panel, we had 3 Americans and we had 4 people from outside America. And it started off that this was a discussion that had come out of a podcast that Pauline and I had done a while ago on what was authenticity, what was typicity, what was regional identity, how do regions determine their identity, and what does regional identity mean in a time when everybody is calling in consultants to look at their own personal terroir and express the individual plot, and what does it mean when the sort of regional identity perhaps is breaking down a little bit. And we started, and this discussion went into all sorts of unexpected places. So we started talking about identity and whether in the current state of things, whether things like the current gatekeepers like export bodies and regional bodies still have a role. And are those bodies becoming hindrances to wine now rather than a help? But pretty quickly, we moved away from simply talking about wine. So we were talking about for example, the new consumers which are coming, that there's a huge demand for more diverse people are demanding to be part of wine. And as part of that, they don't necessarily want to use Eurocentric language or even refer to classic Eurocentric regions anymore. As the top wines of the world become out of reach for pretty much everybody, new hierarchies and new ways of looking at wine are emerging. And what does this mean? That actually it's not just the state of viticulture, which is changing very fast at the moment, but even the whole question around what are the classics? What are the new classics going to be? Do we need classics? Is this something, are we going to have a world where everybody does what they want to do? And what would that world look like? Do we need all these rules and regulations any longer? Or as things become more rocky, are people going to cling to these ever harder as a way of maintaining links with the past? So we had a lot of discussion around terms originally. Who are the gatekeepers? What are the classics? What's breaking down? What's Eurocentric? And then we moved into the question of what's authenticity, and it became about history. And this was really contentious. So on one of the days we were at a winery where there was a sort of storytelling about the winery, and they mentioned the fact that there were Chinese workers that had helped to build the winery. And it was presented in fairly positive terms. And 2 of my panel were absolutely outraged about this and felt like leaving the winery because, of course, the history wasn't that Chinese people happily came and built a winery. It was the fact that they were indentured labor, and this hadn't been discussed truthfully or honestly. And so we got into a whole realm, and it looks like there are history wars coming for wine, and that maybe this is something that we should be aware of. So we talked about issues like people want the truth. How is Bordeaux going to cope in the future when people begin talking about its role as a slave port and the fact that so many streets are named after slavers? Are there people in Bordeaux who've got links to the slave trade that are going to have to account for that somehow? And somebody revealed that actually in France, there are some chateaus now getting historians in to look at their history because they will have to, they'll have to deal with that at some point. So then we moved into the question of fake history, about how many regions are digging up history in order to present a false view of their past. And one of the examples that was used again was Bordeaux, about how many people in Bordeaux are claiming that there was a strong history of women's involvement in chateaux without telling the story that the reason that women got the chateaux was because they were the white elephants that they got lumbered with while their brothers got the good stuff. So what became clear is that authenticity is also a marketable thing. And how are you going to market something when you've got something toxic in your background, you've got something unpleasant, or how are we going to stop people spinning their history to present a false history in order to make money? So the uses of history was something we discussed over a couple of days, and in fact how dangerous history can be, with everybody becoming authentic and telling their stories. What does it mean if you're going to have to tell the real story about where you come from and what you're doing? So the general consensus after a lot of discussion was the only way through is to actually tell the truth. It's to know who you are and to be completely transparent about it, to take the sting out of anything in the past. And this raised questions about identity. And this was really interesting because we had half Americans and half other people. And not surprisingly, from the American side, we had a very different view of identity to everybody else, which was the question of, is identity something that you could create for yourself and determine for yourself, or is identity something that other people impose on you? And as a foreigner where I live, I'm an expat, I very much believe that identity is something that is imposed upon you, whether you like it or not. But the American view, not surprisingly for the land of self-reinvention, believe very strongly that identity is what you claim it is, and how you forge your identity and become authentic is the most sort of important point. So that was all really, really interesting. So the takeaways, the most important things is the fact that with all of these questions about typicity and authenticity, a lot of the sort of verities that we've believed about wine for a very long time are breaking down. And there's a certain amount of chaos, especially with new entrants to wine. And we haven't yet really begun to understand where that's going to go. But one of the things that we have understood is that history is going to become much more important because people can see that there's profit to be made from it. But with this, dealing with history is going to become a lot more fraught. And the reluctance of people to tell the truth and be transparent and present a sort of fairy tale view of wine is going to be a very difficult thing to overcome. So the goal of all of this wasn't really to come up. Oh, the other thing we came up with was the concept of people of somewhere and people of nowhere. If everybody in the wine trade is busy moving around and going to different lands and stuff like that, and yet we present a story about terroir and rootedness, does this matter? Does this matter if leaders of the wine trade actually don't have deep roots in their place themselves? So these were all philosophical questions. I haven't come away with a list of actions because the purpose of this was really to throw things around and to come up with questions that we can look at. And I think for me, the most interesting takeaway was the uses of history. It's not something that I've really thought about before and how much we discussed it, but it turned out to be a very, very robust and contentious and lively topic that I think at Areni we're going to have to do a lot of work to look at. So that's from me.
And thank you. And that touched on the conversation we had on artificial intelligence as well, because if all the information out there is about, partial history or revised history or whatever, then we have even a bigger problem because the new artificial intelligence will, just based on that. So yeah, a lot of things in our conversation to continue forward. And I've got the very impossible task to summarize what we said on the table. So I didn't say also we don't have a recap on the long-term, how to build a long-term reputation, but that touched base on so many of the topics that we've discussed with Felicity. There was loads of common points between what Hannah has discussed in the segmentation and what Felicity has discussed. But of course, we'll have a follow-up analysis of that roundtable as well, because Robert Joseph did an amazing moderation work on that group as well. And so I had the big pleasure to moderate the roundtable on the role and place of wine education in the future of fine wine. And we started by thinking about what's at stake and really why we needed to focus on this topic and why now. It's also, as some of you already know, a key topic for Areni, because our next white paper that we are going to publish in January is on that question. So that was a key moment of exploration for us. So what's important, what's at stake with wine education and its role and place in the future of fine wine? Well, linking to what Felicity just said is the misinformation and our responsibility towards accuracy. Maybe not, truth can be thrown somewhere here, but, at least to provide accurate information, reliable information. There was a growing concern on the lack of creative wine thinkers in the world. That was something that people have seen around them and the most experience of us in the roundtable. And we were wondering what was the role of the wine education classic roots was in that lack of creativity in approaching wine and in talking about wine. What's at stake is, of course, the ability to excite consumers about wine, but ultimately also the capacity to efficiently sell wine in different contexts. And we had many, anecdotes about people mentioning, some member of their staff, that the more they get certified and the higher they went in the certification process, the less efficient they were at selling because they had bias in what they needed to sell. Actually, that was a fascinating takeaway. I didn't precise that we took a very bird's eye view in that conversation, and we covered both education for trade and consumers. We made the distinction when we thought it was relevant, but we tried to talk about both. We also have seen, in the what's at stake and what we need to address is the rise of performative drinking within the trade community, and also some anecdotes about sommeliers around the world getting themselves in unstable financial situation because they really believe they have to be seen drinking the bottles and drinking those classics of super expensive wines. And maybe, wine education needing to focus on maybe that actually doesn't really matter if you haven't, tasted all those, don't ruin yourself for those bottles. And of course, as it's been mentioned before, and notably by Carissa, we had a huge focus on the risk that we have to lose our social license to operate as the wine industry being part of the alcohol industry if we don't work on our messages in relation to alcohol and respectful drinking, and notably within the trade and the education and the information about alcohol and health being not maybe enough shared and discussed even within one trade. So the things that we've learned, I've selected 7, but there were so many others, and I can't wait to take a deep dive in this and to actually write the white paper. But one of the key things that we've learned and that we realize is that wine education is often seen as an end game instead of a foundation, and that's part of the problem, that it's mostly that, okay, I'm done, I'm certified, whatever, I'm finished, I don't need to learn anymore. So that's something that we need to address, that maybe the current wine education system can limit creativity, but also that it was a way to have an international language about wine. So it was a two-sided coin. So there was a tension between scalability and a more personalized approach and language. Same thing for language. I know that we think about the language of wine as something that can be more inclusive, or different cultures or different feedback. Then, how do we make it that everybody can understand each other at a global level? We also had that very good 3 C's, that every form of education should improve comprehension, comfort, and confidence, that the one that receives it. We had a big debate about, do we need to inform or do we need to shape as educator today? And we all agreed that we had a responsibility as educators maybe to play our role in accelerating transition, and for example, in regards to environmental and climate change. And as a realization as well that wine education relies on access to accurate information to wines, to people, and to places. And that's within our responsibility, all of us, to be aware of that. And that if we want to engage in education, we have to do everything that's in our power, in our position, to increase access to information, to accurate information, to wines, to people, and to places. And of course, and that's a topic that we are going to follow up on directly at Areni, but we have a responsibility to educate on wine and health, and notably within the trade. So very logically, the actions and next steps that followed are all in line with what we had discussed, which is the people. So we took very personal action. So everyone around the roundtable actually took responsibility for one of them and are going to conduct that in their own field. But to integrate the real cost of wine within their education program. So talk more about the real cost of wine in terms of financial, human, and environmental. Notably in consumer-focused education programs, to emphasize the connection to agriculture and wine links to farming, and why it's important to talk about farming, even when we talk about fine wine, and even when we talk to very high net worth individuals that might be here for the glam or for the status or anything, that working on access to wine, people, and places and information. So we had very, very good examples of community camps that could be done, and how we can include people and how we can continue to open the doors to people that traditionally don't have access to wine, people, places, and information. And also, there was something that was common in all the groups, is one of the setback of the classic certification program is that if you don't succeed, there's a sense of maybe being totally worthless or not being good enough. And that was a very big sentiment across the room. So some of the members actually pledged to actively work on building self-confidence and reducing fear and shame within notably the sommelier community, but the competition community also, everyone doing competitions in the wine world. And something that we are going to be personally very involved in at Areni is the creation of a Towards Respectful Consumption B2B workshop. So again, to integrate alcohol and health in business education and trade education. So that's a summary. Again, we'll have the pleasure to go in each of those topics at depth. But in the last minutes remaining, I know that we are over the time, but what we are going to do about all of this, because Areni is all about creating actionable intelligence. So we had a lot of intelligence during 3 days. Let's make it actionable. So if you follow us, if you are a long-term member of our community, you know that over the last 3 years we had more than 60 episodes of our podcast, which is called In Conversation, on many topics with fine wine leaders, with non-fine wine leaders. Sarah's put some reference in the chat I've seen. And we've done 22 Insight series, so format like today, webinar or in person as well, where we gather experts and we discuss topics. So we've done 22 of them in person and online over the last years. And what's next? And I'm very happy to announce, because it's actually loads of things that you've charged Areni to do through your actions today, dear panelists. But what's coming up for us, something that already started. So we've spent a lot of time defining what fine wine is at Areni. But the next step for us is to define the responsibility that comes with it. So we've launched with Felicity the responsibility series in June, the first one being dedicated to soil health that you can already find on all the different platforms when you access podcasts. We are going to have another one. We are going to have 6 episodes in total. There's one around the role in packaging and language in favoring moderation and in encouraging moderation. Apparently there's a scientific way that you can still sell your product, but make sure that people don't have too much of it. So we're going to go deep into this. We're also going to go deep into the role of managing, talents when you are in a rural community, when it's long-term vocational work. So that's very essential for the wine world. And also, I'm very happy to announce the next 2 Insight series based on everything that we've discussed. But on the 12th of September, you can already save the dates. That would be online. That would be at the same time, so 4 p.m. UK, whatever time that would be, if we have changed times or not. But do we still need gatekeepers? Because that was a topic that was across, reputation, segmentation, education. What's the role of a gatekeeper today? Do we really still need them? Why? And on the 17th of October, same thing, a Tuesday at 4 p.m., we'll talk about what Anna mentioned as well, the financial part and the steps that we need to take to go from profitability maybe to financial sustainability, and to ensure that we're still relevant financially so that we can do all the amazing things that we want to do. We've published 5 major publications across the last 2 years, and we have 2 coming up in the next few weeks or few months. So we've started a profile, a series called the Country Profile. We've done France already. We're going to release Japan in a few weeks. So focusing on the fine wine consumers, who they are, how can we segment them, what are they like, how have their behavior evolved in the context of their countries and their local markets. And of course, the next white paper, the last one was on rethinking fine wine. We've spent a lot of time thinking about what it meant for the future, but we're going to talk about rethinking wine education based on what we discussed at the think tank, but not only. We've been doing some research for the last 6 months. Many, many thanks to all the sponsors and partners that are supporting us widely at Areni. And I would leave you with that last slide, which is, as you've seen, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of topics that we need to address. There's a lot of things that have been, encouraged, that Areni's been encouraged to do, and we're very, very happy to go and to lead this conversation. But we need your help. So if you want to be part of those conversations, if you want to support us, if you want to accelerate some of the coverage of those topics, you can follow us on social media. You can subscribe to our newsletter. That helps. But you can also become a member and help us also, financially, because we need that to be sustainable. And we are also very happy to build, one-on-one partnership, and, partnership that also will be tailored to your company. We've got some for, general bodies, for small business, for, retailers, everything. So Sarah and I are here to talk about this. And on all of this, I think we are a bit over time, but it's very difficult to stay within an hour. And thank you very much to all the panelists for being so precise and prepared to make sure that we don't go over time too much. Thank you to all of you in the chat. I've seen that, you've all stayed until the end, and that's amazing. We had an amazing audience today. Thank you very much. If you want to be in touch, if you've got ideas, if you want to follow up on anything that's been discussed today, well, you know where to find us. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Thank you, Anna, Carissa, Nicole, and Felicity for being with us today. Bye.